With no deficit compromise in sight, the automatic spending cuts known as the sequester are almost certain to kick in tomorrow. What will it take for Washington to come together and tackle the debt crisis? Joining us for his first CNBC interview since the election, Representative Paul Ryan, also chairman of the Budget Committee. Welcome back. It's great to see you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Becky, Joe, and Andrew. Thanks for letting me back on your show. I appreciate it.
Well, we've had a standing invite. It's great that you're finally with us again. I guess the first question to ask you, it looks like it's going to happen, but we don't know a lot of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes that the people don't talk about. Are you aware of anything going on right now behind the scenes that could possibly avert this or not?
Well, as you know, the sequester was designed to force action to deal with the deficit and debt. We passed a bill 300 days ago dealing with this. As recently as December, Senate still hasn't done anything. So I do expect the sequester to take effect because the Senate hasn't acted. The president's around the country campaigning instead of governing here in Washington. And so what I think we'll see happen next week is we will pass an appropriations measure that gives the administration more flexibility. We had already negotiated spending bills with respect to Veterans Affairs, military, and that will be part of this because those spending levels have been negotiated. So I think you'll see more flexibility for the military, for national security, and more flexibility for domestic spending so that the president and the agencies can go after waste and inefficiency as the sequester takes place.
Can you put to rest, Chairman, or at least we'll hear your side of it, about whether the deal was actually changed? I was under the impression that both sides at one point had agreed that this would be about actually finally having some spending cuts kick in because you were unable to do it the first time, so we're going to make sure we do it this time. To then change it to a deficit reduction deal that includes higher taxes and revenues instead of what it was intended, was that changing the rules, or was all's fair in Washington?
No, I mean, we obviously believe the president moved the goalposts. I think Bob Woodward has mapped this out pretty effectively. Don't forget, Joe, the president got the largest tax increase in American history 8 weeks ago. Now he's trying to move the goalposts and say, instead of spending cuts, which is what the sequester is, I need a bunch of tax increases for this as well to fuel more spending. Look, if you take these tax loopholes to fuel more spending, you're killing tax reform. That kills our chance for economic growth and job creation. Right. More to the point, even with the sequester taking effect, spending will have gone up 18% since the president took office. So spending is the problem. The deficit's a huge problem. We're going to tackle this. We don't think the sequester is the right way to do it, but it's going to happen. And we will map out a budget that shows you the right way to fix our fiscal problems, to grow the economy, create jobs, and prevent a debt crisis in this country.
And that budget will include not only discretionary budget spending, but also the full entitlements part of it?
That's right. Yeah, you have to reform entitlements to save these programs from bankruptcy, to save the country from a debt crisis. We're the adults in the room who have been proposing this for years. The president is around the country campaigning and not coming to the table with equal proposals to deal with this. And unfortunately, that's the stalemate we have today.
Was there a time when you could have gotten together with the president and said, and I guess maybe the blunt nature of the sequester is a bad thing. Maybe there's a way to do it surgically with waste or whatever. But if he had come to you and said, look, I just don't like the way that we're doing it without being effective in where we're looking to cut things. I want to cut where I want to cut. Will you let me do that? Would you have let him do that if he hadn't said we have to raise revenue?
We're going to do it next week. We're going to give him more flexibility.
Give him the flexibility to actually cut, as long as it's cutting, not.
That's right. That's right. So, Joe, I've thought about what you just asked quite a bit, and I really don't think the president was ever interested in what I call the grand bargain or a big budget deal to deal with these entitlements. He's unwilling to publicly put out ideas to save these entitlements from bankruptcy, and he's been more focused on campaigning against Republicans on these issues. And the net result is nothing gets done up here. So, that's obviously our side from the Republican perspective.
All right.
But the point is we got a spending problem we have to deal with. We're being responsible about it because the goal here is growth, a healthy economy, job creation, and the debt is really hurting that.
But, Paul, is that a non-starter, your plan to say to the president, go ahead, we'll give you the discretion to cut 10% any way you want it? I mean, is that something?
10%.
Well, I'm sorry, 10% in the discretionary spending area, 3% overall.
Well, yeah, it's about 5% on domestic discretionary, 7.9 on defense. We've already agreed to the defense spending levels with Democrats, so we're going to put those bills through next week. And then the sequester will hit, but it already has the flexibility. And so, yes, do we believe that the government, which spends $3.5 trillion this year, can do with $85 billion less? Yes. Do we believe that a government that spends more than $100 billion a year in what we call improper payments, money that shouldn't even be spent, can go after waste and inefficiency without raising taxes? Yes, we believe that. We'll give the president the tool to do that. Whether he chooses to do that or not is his choice. Unfortunately, when he keeps campaigning, it makes governing that much more difficult and solutions harder. We've offered solutions. We're going to continue offering solutions. Hopefully, at the end of the day, we'll actually start solving some problems around here.
Paul, the Republicans have reserved the H.R. 1 designation for a tax bill.
That's right.
Do you expect, in this environment, given what we've just lived through with the sequester, any form of real tax reform to take place in the next, let's say, even 12 months?
I don't know, Andrew. I really don't. But the way that we look at it, and I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, Dave Camp and I have been working on this together, it's not going to be for our lack of trying. We have the highest corporate tax rate. We now tax our successful small businesses at an effective tax rate of about 44%. Look, in Wisconsin, we compete against Canada. They're taxing their businesses at 15%. We need, for economic growth, for international competitiveness, to reform our tax system. We're going to do this in the Ways and Means Committee. We're going to do this in the House. We hope that our Senate counterparts will follow suit. There are a lot of moderate Democrats who agree with us on this. Bull Simpson, you name the group, they think tax reform, lower rates, broader base is the way to go.
Yeah.
So we're going to move this.
Now,
the president, we'll see if the president, follows suit. But it's not going to be for our lack of try because
rates are already higher.
Critical for jobs.
Rates are already higher. Let me just answer this one thing, Paul. We wanted the grand bargain of $4 trillion. We had a guy on earlier that manages money that said we've already done 2.6 or 2.7. Then I got something from someone who knows. I'm not going to out this guy, but someone who's involved with all this. He tells me actually, out of the $4 trillion, even if the sequester goes through, we're only at $1.2 trillion that we've actually cut, because you can't count the Obamacare $1 trillion because it's not even going to pay for that. Those taxes aren't even going to pay for Obamacare. So that at best, with the sequester, we're at 1.2. So we're nowhere near cutting the $4 trillion.
So
are those the right numbers?
That is the right numbers.
You guys have horrible PR.
No.
So here's the deal. I just got to tell you.
Look, the $2.6 trillion number, it's a gross number. It ignores all the deficit spending and deficit increases that occurred under the president's stimulus, payroll tax cuts, increase in domestic discretionary spending. So they're giving you gross, not net deficit reduction. And so, yes, we're not even close to fixing this problem. But that's what really concerns me, Joe. When you hear the president at the State of the Union and around these campaign rallies in the country saying the job of deficit reduction is nearly complete, that's really worrisome to me, because it tells me that he's in complete denial. And we've got to get ahead of this problem before it tackles us like it's happening in Europe. And that's the concern we have, and that's why we're going to continue to offer solutions.
Paul, I just want to go back, if I could, to the tax issue, because we have so many CEOs and other business people who come on this show and want tax reform, both in the corporate sphere and on the personal side. And given what seems to be a rather large divide in Washington over how to do this and whether there's an ability to raise revenue, my question for you is there ability to effectively lower the top tax rates, but as you've talked about, once you remove the loopholes, to at least either keep revenues level or grow them, or at least or maybe it's effectively making the average effective tax rate higher or the same? And is that something that you'd be in favor of, or do you think that rates and effective tax rates ultimately have to become lower?
Well, I think rates and effective tax rates ought to converge in tax reform. That's the whole point of base broadening and rate lowering. We want to have tax rates that are internationally competitive. That means they got to be 20-something. And what we run a lot of numbers around here. If you give away more loopholes for spending, which is what the president's calling for, you're making that an impossible job to accomplish. Because you already got a big tax increase, which gives you a higher revenue baseline, that base broadening is gone. So we believe with the current revenues we have, and I know I'm getting a little technical here, we believe with the current revenues we have, we can have what you just described, lower rates with a broader base without losing revenue and having an internationally competitive tax system. But if you keep giving away those loopholes to fuel more spending, you'll never get that. We're pretty much on that bubble there, and that is why we're saying let's do tax reform and hold loopholes to pay for tax reform. Meanwhile, spending's the problem, and let's focus on spending. And so if we stop campaigning and start governing and coming together with solutions, I really think we can fix this problem. Unfortunately, we control 1/3 of the power arrangement here. We're in the minority. We're the ones who are passing these bills, offering these solutions. and we have nothing to pass on the other side. We have no other solutions being offered, and that's hard to get things done that way.
Chairman Ryan, we watch a lot of polls and try and get a feel for what the public would like to see here, and a lot of it seems to me the way you ask the question, you'll get a different answer on this, but it's still unclear to me exactly where the public
That's because they're watching Ben Bernanke hearings these days.
Right. Well, it's still unclear to me what the public feels about this. It seems most people are in agreement that they would like to see some sort of spending cuts. A lot of them say they would still like to see some cooperation between both sides. I think it really depends on how you ask those questions. But next week, once the sequester kicks in, once you start to see things like longer delays at the airlines, once you see the threat of inspectors, meat inspectors from the Agriculture Department coming out, and that meaning a lot of people getting laid off along those lines, do you expect to have massive pressure from many of your districts to go back to the table and renegotiate? And will the Republicans change their stance at that point?
So this reminds me of when your local school board is saying we need this new tax increase, and if we don't get it, we're going to cut the high school band and the football team first. We call it the Washington Monument effect here. We are going to give the administration the flexibility they need to not do those things you just said, to go after the waste, the fraud, the abuse, low priority spending. If they choose not to do that, then the president will have made the choice to do the things you just described for political benefit. We think that's wrong. We'll see if he does that. But the fact is, Becky, we can't keep spending money we just don't have. We have got to get this deficit and debt under control, not because we just like numbers adding up. It's because that's necessary for growth, for a healthy economy, for job creation, for prosperity. And then we're going to show how you balance the budget to create jobs. We'll show that in a few weeks. This, to me, is what matters most. And so we will give the administration the flexibility. But no, we're not going to walk away from the only chance of getting spending under control around here. When push comes to shove, we'll see if the administration uses the flexibility or not. And if they choose not to do so, then I would just basically say the president's still out there campaigning, trying to maximize political benefit for his ends instead of coming here getting solutions.